Good afternoon. I'm back on a Monday at 4:30. I'm gonna give us a couple of seconds to get started. Today we're gonna be talking about decolonizing our classroom novel sets. Starting with music, last week's topic. I hope you can hear it. Wow. I know. Never do. There we go. All right. All right. So that was actually the song from last week, Ashley, the boy, be you. I realized when I watched the replay that the song didn't play for that long, and you really just heard a snippet when I said snippet. So I wanted to do a do-over, so I did a do-over. So when I was contemplating what to talk about this week, I don't put a lot of planning into it, otherwise that takes the joy out of it. But I was really thinking about where am I finding my joy this week? Last week was a week. I've really been in my feelings this whole school year, this whole year. 2020's been a year with a lot of things. And I think I just really wanted to talk about something that made me happy today. I think there's a lot of things that make me sad right now, and make me angry and make me anxious because they're either outside of my control, they're hurting people that look like me, that are having the same experiences as me, and I wanted to really talk about something that helps children, all children, not just children of color, not just Black children, but all children, to foster empathy and understanding, and to to understand experiences outside of their own, and not just racial, but literally just understanding what is life like outside of my own small little bubble. And literature is one of the ways that happens, right? Everybody understands that. But we often don't pierce that bubble, really. We think we do, but we don't really. And so one of the things that I want to talk about is books that can help us do that. Particularly, this is going to focus on middle school because that's what I teach. And I wanted to talk about specifically what I've done some work around identity. Middle school is a great time to talk about identity because middle schoolers are so self-absorbed, right? They love to talk about themselves, and it's a great time to introduce topics around identity and personal identity. Is actually how I start off my year. I do a unit on personal identity, and it's a great way for me to, one, learn about the kids, and two, for the kids to learn about me. We spend time working on identity charts, our name poems, all these different concepts. And it's a great way to do diversity work, right? People are often like, well, where can I put diversity work in the classroom? It belongs in every classroom, right? So one of the things that, the themes of my class are identity and choices. So our summer read was It Wasn't Me by Dana Allison Levy. It is a really fast-paced read, even though it's thick. The main character is a boy, Theo, and it's kind of like a modern retelling of, oh my goodness, why can I not think of it? It's a movie. Where the kids, they get in trouble at school and they have to spend it in detention on a Saturday morning. I cannot think of the name of that movie. It's killing me. Somebody's gonna put it in the comments. But anyways, so it's a great read, and it's a great way actually to start because it's like 6 different perspectives. And Theo's artwork is damaged, right? And there's these 6 kids spending their time in this justice circle trying to understand what happened and why what happened, right? And so it's a great way to introduce justice circles to your school or to your classroom if that's what you want to do. And it's a great way to talk about stereotypes, and not just in terms of, oftentimes when we think of stereotypes, we think automatically of racial stereotypes or things along those lines. This goes deeper than that, right? It's the nerd, the jock, the princess. Like, there's these stereotypes that kids in middle school really put on each other, right? And getting beyond that and really showing empathy and understanding of, like, are we really looking for, here you go, justice, or are we looking for punishment, right? So I think it's a really great way to introduce that concept, right? And the main character is not a person of color, but other main characters in here are. And even though it doesn't necessarily delve into race, I think if that's what you wanted to do, you can go into that. If you wanted to talk about gender and gender expectations, you can go into that. If you wanted to talk about sexuality, you can go into that. I think it opens a lot of windows, and if you wanted to open that window even more and like push through it, you could. So I think it's a great opening book. It's also a great independent read. What we're getting ready to read next, as soon as I can find it, is Harlem Summer by Walter Dean Myers. I love Walter Dean Myers because he writes for struggling readers. And it's a great way just to start with a book that is not as intimidating. And a lot of times when people think about books of color, the story is often centered in pain, right? It's centered in the civil rights movement. It's centered in slavery. It's centered in these moments that are painful historically, and the conflict is, particularly Black stories, is centered in the Black person's racial identity, right? This story is not, right? Mark, who's the main character, his race has nothing to do with his conflict. And I love that because I'm not having to tease out why Mark is in conflict. It has nothing to do with his race. But we talk about race because this is set during the Harlem Renaissance, right? So we have this moment that often isn't talked about of great Black excellence that is happening during the Harlem Renaissance. We get to talk about Langston Hughes, the Crisis magazine, and all these wonderful things, in addition to not some wonderful things that are happening. You have lynching, you have these other things that are happening in the background as well. So it's not all roses, but there is Black excellence that is happening at the same time. And so I think it is good when we tell these stories of oppression and struggle that there is also excellence in Black history. Right? You can't just tell this story of oppression. It wasn't just that. Like, we did excellence with that oppression, right? Like, we excelled. We did wonderful things. We had Black Wall Street. We had the Harlem Renaissance. So there are moments of joy, right? This goes back to my theme of joy. Where is the joy in all this struggle and all this oppression? Where are we finding the joy? So Mark is struggling with who he's going to be as a person. He hasn't quite figured it out. He's kind of floating through life. That's kind of like a lot of kids in middle school are like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just, I don't know. Life's happening. I'm just kind of floating through. I'm not really making a definitive decision. I just got in the car with my friends, right? That's a definitive decision, but like in their mind, they didn't definitively make a decision. So Mark is a great person and a great protagonist to read along in his story. Then, because you know, you can't have it without the kinetic text, The Outsiders. The kids love this book. I do not personally enjoy it. But we read it and then we talk about it afterwards, and the kids rave and rave and rave and rave and rave and rave. And I also want to acknowledge that I teach at a predominantly white school. They're like, Miss Tellis, did you just love this book? And this is me. No. What? Why not? Tell me where I saw myself in this book. Tell me where I would have connected to this book. What part of me would have found this book interesting? And it gets them to pause and think, right? There's nothing wrong with that. You have different stories. There's a whole bunch of stories, so you can see yourself in it, right? But it gets them to pause just for a second, planting a seed of like, oh, she's right. This was a very, very white book. A very white boy book. Right. Okay, all right. Doesn't mean that you don't have to like the book. Doesn't mean that the book didn't connect with you. Doesn't mean any of that. It just is what it is. So, of course, we talk about the themes of insiders, outsiders, who is considered, you know, in, out. We also talk about family. I really go over the plot, plotting a story, right? Because after this, I have the kids write their own personal narrative and talk about a moment in their life that stands out for them, using this not as a model, but as a jumping point of like, so this moment, these times really stood out for Ponyboy. What has happened in your life that is worth writing about? Everybody has a moment in their life that is worth writing about, right? What is the purpose of writing? Why do we write? We write because we want people to read our work. So we want something to continue to live on after we're done. We don't just write because our teacher tells us to write, right? We have to have a purpose for our writing, because I want our children to have a love for reading and for writing. So we write our personal narratives, and because we've read these very descriptive books, and it helps them to think about all these details and exploring and pulling in this imagery of different things. And they actually write some really, really interesting things, and they're really powerful moments, and they're sometimes very explosive moments, and sometimes they're very quiet moments of, I went fishing with my dad, or I kept skateboarding down this hill until I could figure it out, or I was sitting in class and I was reading, and this part of the book really stuck with me. Like, that's what one kid wrote about. And the way that they pulled that narrative together was super powerful. After that, we read Jacqueline Woodson's Harbor Me, which is a newer book. It is a lower Lexile read, but it has a lot of good content in it. So the protagonist is a girl of color whose mother has passed and whose father is in jail. She's being raised by her uncle, who is white. And as the story unveils, we find out ultimately what happened to her mother and why her father is in jail. That unfolds over the course of the story, and there's six. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 of them that are put in this art room. It's called A Room to Talk. They are considered the special ed kids. That word is never used in the book, but they know it. And their teacher basically tells them, I know that you need a place and space to be with each other. I know you need community, and I know you need a space without me. So here is this room. It's the former art room. So they make this acronym called A Room to Talk. And they get an hour every Friday just to sit with each other and talk. And they hash out all these different issues. So each kid in there is bringing a different identity piece in there. Some of the kids are wealthy. Some of their different backgrounds. So immigration is brought up. Wealth is brought up, race is brought up, and so it's a really great way that even though the Lexile level is low, the content really is rich of what you can talk about. They talk about the Lenape indigenous people and who was there first, and what does that really mean in terms of modern times, and what you would have done if you could travel back in time, and what implications that has for now. They talk about Tamir Rice. They talk about what it means, again, that concept of insider and outsider is brought up again, and what it means and how it feels to be othered. So all of these themes keep coming back up through these books that I picked. And it's really great to bring in current events. And that's how you'll get a higher lexile with the reading. And then, because, you know, Corona happened, I was going to have them all pick their own independent reading book at the end of the year and have them do a lit magazine in small groups. But I pivoted and had them read Fever 1793 by Lori Halls Anderson. And if you are ever in need of historical fiction that is early American history, she is a phenomenal writer. Lori Halls Anderson, oh my goodness. Can't recommend her highly enough. Her stuff is historically accurate. My background's in history. Phenomenal writer. So this is set during the yellow fever of 1793 in Philadelphia. The kids really enjoyed it. There are a lot of parallels. It helped them to make connections, to see that this isn't the first time that we faced a pandemic. We as a nation have faced this before. We will face it, you know, we will get through this. That piece, right, of, okay, somebody else has gone through this and this is not the end of the world. What I liked about this book is that it touched on so many different things. There's a relationship with the mother, the grandfather, and there is their cook, Maddie, who is a free Black woman. It talks about Richard Allen, who founded the AME Church. I was raised AME, so that touched on my little heart. And she just weaves in all these different things. She talks about Rush, who was one of the key people who helped to, there's no cure technically for yellow fever. So, but the treatment, he helps to come up with, this is how you treat the symptoms of yellow fever. And there's a lot of different directions that you can take this. And I love that the protagonist it's not centered on a love story, although there is a love interest that comes at the end, but she is saving herself. And it is about her figuring out things for herself, her family, what she wants, and making decisions. Because at one point she ultimately ends up literally alone and figuring things out for herself and how is she going to survive in a city by herself. So this is a really great read. The languaging uses a lot of old-timey, that's not the right word, but antiquated language. So if you have if you're going to do this as an independent read, I would just make sure that you are helping your students parse out some of the words in there. But other than that, this is a really, really great book for that. And then I had them do a research paper, but I called it, oh my goodness, what did I call it? A feature article. So it wasn't a traditional research paper. I don't believe in a 5-paragraph essay, because where do you see a 5-paragraph essay in real life? Nowhere. It's not a real thing. So they wrote a feature article, like something you would see in a magazine. You picked a research topic and you researched it. So if it came up in the book or is tangentially related to the book, you could research it. So New York came up in the book. One kid wrote about the history of New York, right? So they talked about New York being a cultural center in America. One kid talked about the Parisian influence in America. One kid, of course, researched the AME Church. One kid researched Richard Allen. One kid researched Benjamin Rush. Several kids researched yellow fever. Of course, some kids researched the Spanish flu. They went all over the place with what they researched, and essentially they wrote magazine-style articles about what they ended up researching, which was really, really fruitful. And I thought a really great way to end the year in a way that no one could have predicted that we were going to end the year. So I think when you're thinking about ways to decolonize your classroom novel set, you want to think about your theme. What are your themes? Who are your protagonists? Are your protagonists all male? Are they all female? Are they all white? Like, what are the stories they're telling? Where are they set? What are their settings? Like, all those things need to come into play in the stories. Are you, whose stories are being told? Whose voices are being included? Whose voices are not being included? Whose voices are being silenced? I think one of the things that I definitely could include more of is a definite nod to LGBTQ in my curriculum. And I'm working on that, definitely. That is something that I am working on with short stories. I also am actively working to include more Latinx stories. I use 11 by Sandra Cisneros and for one of my mentor texts, and I use Who Are You Today, Maria? And I use DeSoto. I can't think of the name of the story. Oh, it's a great story. Seventh grade. So I also bring in short stories, right? So that's another way that you can bring in diverse voices. And I think that is how you start, right? Like, you start not necessarily small, but you just start, right? Even if it's one book and you keep going. Because if you don't start, then how do you do it, right? So start with a couple of books. Start with your short stories. Start now. Whatever you were going to use, find something else that is more inclusive, but teaches the same theme. And you'd be surprised how kids will respond to that. One of my students who identifies as Latinx sent me a little note that was like, thank you so much for including this short story. I've never had a short story, a teacher in English have like a Spanish translation of the story included in English. And it wasn't that the story was translated into English. There was just, when they were quoting the dialogue, it was quoted in Spanish because they were quoting what the grandmother was saying, right? So it's those small things, right? That's not a major thing. I can definitely be doing more, right? But those things, like, kids notice that. And so we need to make sure that we are representing the children that are in our classroom, that we're holding up a mirror that they can see themselves, that all children are seeing themselves reflected positively in our curriculum. And that's what we need to be doing. And that's all decolonizing your curriculum, your classroom sets. That's what it means, is holding up a mirror so that children can positively see themselves in the novels that they're reading in your classroom, in the short stories, in the text. And it's more than just the supplemental of like, oh, okay, we read a Langston Hughes poem. Oh, okay, we read a Maya Angelou poem. Like, you have to move beyond that piece and really think about, how am I really incorporating diverse voices and amplifying them, and not just, okay, I love this particular text and I love these texts and these are my Kinaic texts, and then I'm just going to bring in this one diverse voice to counter this Kinaic text and then I'm done. Like, you have to center diverse voices, right? There's my Kinaic text. These are my diverse voices. And that's decolonizing your curriculum. Because what makes something Kinaic? Right? In 1960s, when The Outsiders came out, this wasn't considered Kinaic. It becomes Kinaic later on because somebody decides it's Kinaic. Who's to say that in 20 years, one of these other books doesn't become Kinaic? Like, it's all opinion based. You do what's best for the kids that you have in front of you. And I know for the kids that I teach, it is important for me to expand their horizons. It is important for me to show them that there is joy in the Black experience. It is important for me to show them and introduce them to there's all these different types of ways of being, and there are mirrors for you and your experiences, and I need to show them windows into other people's experiences as well, right? So that's what I have for today. That's my little tidbit about decolonizing your curriculum. That is what has brought me joy. That is what I'm holding on to when I feel overwhelmed in these moments. I hope that that is helpful. If you would like to talk more one-on-one about what's going on at your school or your curriculum specifically, please feel free to reach out. You can find me on Twitter at the Anti-Bias Edu, or Instagram at the Anti-Bias Educator, and of course on Facebook, where you are right now. Always by email, Stephanie at the antibiaseducator.com. Happy to help, happy to think things through with you. I hope you have a fantastic week. Toodaloo, tally ho.